In honor of Jewish American Heritage Month, I want to tell you about something you probably don't know. I just learned The Curious George was written by two Jewish writers, H.A. Rey and Margret Rey, and is about their experience fleeing France just as the Schmazis invaded. Maybe some of you knew this already, but I didn't. This biography is from the Curious George website. Hans Augusto Rey was born on September 16, 1898 in Hamburg, Germany. He grew up there near the world-famous Hagenbeck Zoo and developed a lifelong love for animals and drawing. Margaret Elizabeth Waldstein, who would be known to most of the world as Margret Rey, was also born in Hamburg on May 16, 1906. The two met briefly when Margaret was a young girl before she left Hamburg to study art. They were reunited in 1935 in Rio de Janeiro, where Hans was selling bathtubs as part of a family business, and Margaret was escaping the political climate in Germany. Margaret convinced Hans to leave the family business, and soon they were working together on a variety of projects. Hans and Margaret were married in Brazil on August 16, 1935, and they moved to Paris after falling in love with the city during their European honeymoon. It was there that Hans published his first children's books, after a French publisher saw his newspaper cartoons of a giraffe and asked him to expand upon them. Raffi and the Nine Monkeys, Cecily G. and Nine Monkeys in the British and American editions was the result, and it marked the debut of the mischievous monkey named Curious George. After Raffi and the Nine Monkeys was published, Rey decided that the Curious George deserved a book of his own, so they began to work on a manuscript that featured the lovable and exceedingly curious little monkey. But the late 30s and early 40s were a tumultuous time in Europe, and before the manuscripts could be published, the Reys, both German Jews, found themselves in a horrible situation. Mustache Man and his schmatzy party were tearing through Europe, and they were poised to take control of Paris. Knowing they must escape before the schmatzis took power, Hans cobbled together 2 bicycles out of spare parts. Early in the morning of June 14th, 1940, the Reys set off on their bicycles. They brought very little with them on their pre-dawn flight, only warm coats, a bit of food, and 5 manuscripts, one of which was Curious George. The schmatzis entered Paris just hours later, but the Reys were already on their way out. They rode their makeshift bicycles for 4 long days until reaching the French-Spanish border, where they sold them for train fare to Lisbon. From there, they made their way to Brazil and on to New York City, beginning a whole new life as children's book authors. I don't have the first book, though I'm sure I've read it, but here's a summary from an article in The New Yorker. The man in the yellow hat captures George in the jungle and puts him in his bag. George is visibly distressed. The text describes him as sad. The man in the yellow hat then brings George aboard a ship, informing him that he'll be delivered to a zoo and advising him to stay out of trouble. The tone is cheerful, if also charged with fear of the unknown. The main event on the boat is that George tries to fly like the seagulls he sees and nearly drowns. One of the books that I do have on my shelf is Curious George Rides a Bike, which certainly sounds inspired by that part of their story. We don't hear about fleeing the Yahtzees as being explored in children's books much, but it seems like, at least as far as Curious George is concerned, that's where most of the inspiration came from. So during this Jewish American Heritage Month, if you want to find books that start talking about the Shoah at a young reader level, Curious George seems like the series to do it. And I can't believe I didn't know about this till today. Happy Jewish American Heritage Month and happy reading.